Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating, completely paradigm-shifting approach to strategic foresight. We're unpacking the work of Professor Ibrahim Abdullah Salqini, specifically his breakdown of how global power dynamics are transforming. If you've ever found yourself wondering how ancient religious texts could possibly intersect with modern, hard-hitting geopolitical forecasting, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's just jump right into it.
This whole concept brings up a super intriguing, almost counterintuitive question. How exactly can ancient texts draw the literal maps of our future global landscape? I mean, usually we think of strategic planning as being driven purely by, modern intelligence, economic spreadsheets, and satellite imagery. But the source material we're analyzing today makes a bold claim. It argues that looking at divine texts, specifically the Quran and the Sunnah, isn't just about spiritual reflection, it's actually a foundational piece of high-level, calculable strategic foresight.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the equation for foreseeing the future, look at strategic planning in the prophet's biography, reframe how we read end-of-times texts, visualize upcoming global power balances, and finally wrap up with the path toward the universality of Islam. Section 1. Combining texts and reality. Let's look at the core equation for foresight. Right, so there's a really deliberate contrast at the heart of the author's methodology here. On one side, you've got the study of Sharia texts, the Quran and the Sunnah. On the exact opposite side, you have the hardcore, gritty analysis of reality, which means crunching political, economic, military, and demographic data. The absolute crucial takeaway from the author is that true foresight requires fusing both of these together. If you just rely on the data, you completely miss the overarching historical patterns outlined in divine texts. But on the flip side, relying purely on texts without analyzing demographic and economic shifts, that just leads to passive waiting. You literally need both to build a reliable roadmap. Moving on to Section 2, the Prophet's Blueprint. Let's see how this actually played out in historical practice. Now, the author proves this idea of strategic forecasting isn't just some modern 20th century invention. He points directly to the Prophet's biography, or the Seerah. When you look at the chronological moves mapped out here, from the early migration to Abyssinia, to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Battle of Mu'tah, and finally Usama's expedition, these were not just random, spontaneous events. According to the text, these were masterclasses in executive strategic planning. They were highly calculated moves based on anticipating future probabilities. When you actually look behind the history of those specific events, the underlying strategy just leaps out at you. Take the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, for instance. That was all about formulating agreements based on calculated foresight to lock in long-term stability. And the Battle of Mu'tah? The author notes this was a brilliant strategic move to preserve state prestige, essentially deterring great powers from thinking the emerging Islamic State was an easy target. And Usama's expedition? That was a deliberate, incredibly smooth transition of military leadership to the youth. It ensured the next generation was fully prepped to take the helm. Every single major move was calculated for resilience. Section 3. Reframing the end of times. If that's how the past was handled, how does the author suggest we view prophecies about the future? Let's take a look. The author points out a pretty stark contrast in how these prophecies are usually viewed. Traditionally, people tend to read end-of-times hadith, these prophetic traditions about the future, with this very passive, almost fearful mindset. You know, the vibe. Panic, waiting for the end of the world, basically abandoning worldly efforts altogether. But the text argues for a massive, game-changing paradigm shift toward a strategic, active reading. Instead of fear, the author says we have to reframe these texts as strategic data points. They're actually indicators meant to trigger preparation, to help us identify shifting geopolitical landscapes, and to actively build wealth and justice before these events happen. It literally turns prophecy into actionable strategy. Which brings us to Section 4, Visualizing Global Shifts. How does this active mindset apply to forecasting our current world? By mapping ancient texts directly onto current demographic, military, and economic realities, the author outlines a few major, highly anticipated geopolitical shifts. First up, he forecasts the economic and military decline of US and European powers. And that naturally leads to a second point, their future inability to launch large-scale military campaigns, or what he calls crusades, in the Islamic world. At the exact same time, the author forecasts the rapid rise of China as a unipolar nuclear economic powerhouse. Finally, as Western hegemony kind of fades out, the text predicts the emergence of new Islamic power centers that will step up to fill that resulting political vacuum. Visually, we can really see this conceptual shift in the global balance of power. You've got this forecasted contraction of the previously dominant Western powers,
the massive, undeniable expansion of Chinese influence, and then this critical, growing wedge of emerging Islamic centers. The author heavily emphasizes that this transition is going to create a completely new global dynamic, one that demands intense preparation and, frankly, throwing out the old ways of thinking. Before we look at the specific, actionable steps required to navigate all of this, let's just pause and reflect on the transition to this final phase. The aesthetic of the source material here serves as a great reminder. Behind all this cold, hard geopolitical data and strategic forecasting is a deeply rooted philosophical and theological framework. It's all about moving toward one specific, ultimate destination.
Section 5. Actionable steps for the future. So, what proactive measures must actually be taken here?
Before we hit the actual list of steps, it's super vital to grasp the core thesis here, which is drawn straight from the book's title, the transformation from contemporary enslavement to the universality of Islam. The author envisions a total ground-up system shift. He argues that the world, which is basically exhausted by contemporary systems of control, or what he terms enslavement, is in desperate need of the universality, justice, and holistic approach of Islam. But he makes it clear, getting there is not on autopilot. It requires immense, highly calculated effort. To prepare for this universality, the author maps out these 5 concrete, calculable steps. Number 1, prepare all types of power. And it doesn't just mean military might. He explicitly includes economic muscle, media presence, and intellectual strength. Number 2, his strategy strongly focuses on removing foreign influence and the Zionist occupation from the region. Number 3, if a major power, say China, were to attack, his proposed strategy is to actually absorb that attack by using the vast geography of the region to diffuse their momentum. Number 4, build deep, robust strategic relations between sincere Muslim states to capitalize on that upcoming global political vacuum. And finally, number 5, when a central Islamic power does emerge, he advises supporting it fully and just abandoning those petty, localized rivalries. And that brings us to the final major takeaway of this explainer. The methodology we've unpacked today argues that the future isn't just some big mystery that we should sit around and passively wait for. By fusing the profound insights of Sharia texts with a really rigorous, hard-hitting analysis of reality, the future actually becomes something to be strategically built. Which leaves us with one pretty provocative thought to end on. As these massive, earth-shaking global shifts start to unfold, what part will you play in shaping that future? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the text. Keep questioning and keep learning.